Today's first question comes from a brother in Pakistan, and it's one that has sparked quite a bit of discussion in recent times. Many of our scholars, especially those in the region, have been debating the interpretation of a particular hadith and the meaning of a specific clue related to it. So, inshallah, I have taken the time today to go over these hadiths in depth, and I'd like to share the conclusions with you. The topic in question pertains to the Prophet Muhammad and his prediction about an army that will march towards India. This prophecy has garnered considerable attention, and there are two specific hadiths that we need to focus on. These hadiths form the foundation of this discussion, and we will look at them from a scholarly perspective, analyzing their authenticity and context. First, let's examine the two hadiths. Both of them describe the Prophet Muhammad, speaking about a time when an army will be sent to India, and how this army will be victorious. These two hadiths, which are found in the major collections of hadith, are among the most significant. They are included in all 6 of the canonical books of hadith, and it's important to note that they are considered to be of the highest levels of authenticity. The scholars agree that these hadiths are of great value. In terms of their authenticity, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim are generally considered the most reliable sources. After them, Sahih Abu Dawud and Jami at-Tirmidhi rank in the 3rd position, with differing opinions on which has the stronger authenticity among them. However, it is agreed that the hadith found in these two collections are trustworthy and widely accepted. To provide a bit of background, Imam al-Nasai, one of the great scholars of hadith, recorded a chapter specifically focused on this prophecy about the expedition to India. You can find this chapter in his book in volume 6, page 249, where it is referred to as the expedition to India or the Battle of Hind. This chapter contains multiple narrations related to the prophecy, but in reality, these narrations are quite similar, stemming from the same core event. Now, let's dive deeper into understanding how we should interpret these hadiths and what they tell us. It's important to recognize that when we encounter multiple narrations of the same event, they are often transmitted through various chains of narrators. These chains, or isnads, serve to verify the authenticity of the hadith. If multiple chains lead back to the same companion, sahabi, it can help affirm the reliability of the hadith. However, it is also crucial to check the strength of each chain, as one of them may be weak. When we come across a hadith narrated through several chains, we must assess each chain and determine whether the hadith as a whole is authentic. In this case, the narration begins with a chain that leads back to the companion Abu Hurairah. He is one of the most prominent companions of the Prophet Muhammad, and is known for narrating a large number of hadiths. In this particular narration, Abu Hurairah tells us that the Prophet Muhammad promised that the Muslims would be victorious in a campaign to India. Abu Hurairah also shared his personal reflections, saying that if he were to die during this mission, he would be a martyr, shaheed, and would be rewarded with paradise. This particular hadith is significant because it outlines the Prophet's assurance of success for the Muslim army. Abu Hurairah also conveys the personal feeling of hope and devotion in his words, expressing his longing to be among the martyrs if he were to die in such a noble cause. However, as we investigate further, we come across a few potential issues with the authenticity of this hadith. The chain of narrators includes a figure named Abu, who, as we learn, is not well known in the scholarly community. His identity is unclear, about the reliability of his narration. Furthermore, the condition of some of the narrators in the chain is not entirely clear. For example, some scholars have raised doubts about the memory of certain narrators. This is common in early Islam before the formalization of the science of hadith. When narrations are passed down through generations without proper documentation, it can lead to uncertainties about the accuracy of the reports. In this case, the figure named Abu has been described as unknown in the scholarly tradition. This means that there is a lack of clarity about his trustworthiness as a narrator. Without knowledge of his character, it becomes difficult to rely on his narration. In such cases, we say that there is a large question mark surrounding his reliability. In light of this, many scholars have classified this particular narration as weak, deif, due to the unknown status of Abu. This is an important distinction because in hadith studies, a weak narration is one that cannot be relied upon to establish a definitive ruling or belief. There is another significant issue to consider, which is the presence of similar narrations in other hadith collections. While the version of the hadith found in Sahih Muslim is generally accepted, there are alternative narrations that add further complexity to the picture. Some of these narrations come from different isnads or chains of transmission and may offer additional details or nuances to the story. For example, in another narration found in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, a different chain of narrators is presented, and the wording of the hadith varies slightly. This version also mentions significant because it expands on the Prophet's promise of divine protection and the reward for those who participate in the campaign. Despite these variations, the central message of the hadith remains consistent. The Prophet Muhammad promised that an army would be sent to India, and those who participated would be rewarded. Some scholars argue that these additional narrations help strengthen the overall message of the hadith, even if some of the chains of narrators are weaker. At this point, it is essential to examine the role of early Islamic scholars in determining the authenticity of hadiths. Scholars such as Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, and others worked tirelessly to collect, verify, and categorize hadiths. They employed rigorous methodologies to ensure that the narrations they included in their collections were authentic. They meticulously examined the chains of narrators, the reliability of each individual, and the consistency of the narration itself. In the case of this particular hadith, we see that it has been discussed by a number of renowned scholars, including Imam al-Nasai and Imam Ahmad. While the hadiths relate concerns about the weakness of certain chains of transmission, while others have argued that the message of the hadith can still be accepted based on the overall strength of the narrations. Moreover, it is important to understand the historical context of these hadiths. The Prophet Muhammad spoke about the campaign to India at a time when the Muslim community was still in its early stages. The Islamic State had not yet expanded to the extent that it would during the reign of the later caliphs. The prophecy of the Muslim army's victory in India foreshadowed the eventual spread of Islam in the Indian subcontinent, a process that took place over several centuries. The first significant military, including the establishment of Islamic rule in parts of India, was seen as the fulfillment of the Prophet's prophecy. However, the initial expeditions were much smaller in scale, and they were not immediately successful in establishing lasting Muslim rule. In conclusion, while the hadiths about the expedition to India may contain some weaknesses in their chains of narration, the overall message remains powerful and significant. The promise of victory and divine protection for those who participate in such a noble cause serves as a reminder of the rewards awaiting the faithful, both in this life and the hereafter. The historical context of these hadiths and the gradual spread of Islam in the Indian subcontinent further reinforce the relevance of this prophecy. May Allah grant us understanding and guide us to act upon the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, and may he protect us from any misinterpretations or misunderstandings of his message. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to stay updated with more inspiring Islamic content. Like, share, and comment to support our work and spread the message. Examining historical narratives and the role of Muslims in India. In the first part of our discussion, we touched upon the importance of understanding how historical events are portrayed and how these portrayals are often shaped by political agendas. It's clear that some of the narratives circulating today about Islamic influence in India are rooted in modern-day ideological conflicts. The way Islam is represented by certain factions of Hindu nationalist organizations, such as the Hindutva ideology, RSS, and BJP, positions Islam as something foreign and alien influence that arrived as a colonial force, alienating the native culture and depriving the people of their rightful heritage. However, when we delve deeper into the historical context, this narrative begins to unravel. It's important to clarify that Muslims who arrived in India did not follow the same colonialist model as the British did. They didn't come to conquer and enslave, but to integrate, govern, and contribute to the cultural landscape. The narrative that portrays Muslims as mere foreign rulers who impose their culture is not only misleading but also fails to acknowledge the genuine integration and contributions of Muslim rulers in India. It is undeniable that the arrival of Muslim dynasties in India was different from the British colonial experience. While the British lived in a segregated manner, maintaining their distance from the native population, refusing even to learn the local language, the Muslim rulers, on the other hand, embraced Indian culture, traditions, and practices. The British legacy and its impact on India's cultural landscape. When we compare this to the actions of the British, the differences become more stark. The British forced the English language upon the Indian subcontinent, robbed the land of its riches, and left India in a state of cultural and economic depletion. Their looting didn't end with the wealth they extracted from India. It extended to cultural and intellectual theft, influencing India in ways that are still felt today. It is important to note that the wealth that the British Empire accumulated, much of it derived from India, played a significant role in establishing the British Empire as one of the most powerful forces in history. Without this wealth, the British Empire would not have been the same. In contrast, Muslim rulers did not bring India into an economic abyss. Instead, they contributed significantly to the development of Indian culture and society. It's a fact that many of the elements that we now associate with Indian culture, its cuisine, architecture, and even its languages owe a great deal to Muslim influence. The question of Indian identity and the Muslim influence. One of the most powerful symbols of this fusion is biryani, a dish that, as a matter of historical fact, originated under Muslim rule. Imagine India without biryani. It might sound humorous, but it's a profound way of illustrating the influence of Muslims on Indian culture. Whether it's the Mughal Empire's contributions to Indian art, cuisine, or the evolution of the Hindi-Urdu language, the impact is undeniable. It's essential to understand that India, as we know it today, would not exist in its current form without the Muslim contributions. To suggest that Muslims were colonial rulers is a fallacy. They didn't come to conquer. They came to be a part of the land, to rule with the same reverence for the culture and traditions that they encountered, and to contribute to the development of India in ways that have shaped its identity. Religious tensions and the British divide and rule strategy. Now, let's address the issue of the religious tensions that some claim have always existed between Muslims and Hindus in India. A key point raised by scholars, such as a professor I encountered during my time at Yale, who was an expert on Indian Islam, is that these tensions were not always present. Her central argument, which she presented persuasively, was that Muslims and Hindus in India coexisted peacefully for many centuries before the arrival of the British. It was only with British rule that religious tensions began to flare up. The British, as part of their divide and rule strategy, intentionally sowed discord between the two communities, fostering religious animosity for the sake of their own control over the region. They perpetuated the idea that Muslims and Hindus were inherently at odds, even though the historical reality was far more complex and cooperative. The conflicts that did arise were largely political in nature, not religious. Throughout the history of the Indian subcontinent, we can find numerous examples of Muslim rulers employing Hindu advisors and vice versa. There were Muslim armies composed of Hindus and Hindu kings who sought the counsel of Muslim leaders. The role of the British in fomenting religious division. The British, however, sought to exploit these religious differences for their own benefit. They instilled fear and distrust between Muslims and Hindus, which led to outbreaks of communal violence. The most significant being the Hindu-Muslim riots that began under British rule and continued well into the 20th century. It wasn't until the British implemented their policies of divide and conquer that tensions began to grow between the two communities. The first major Hindu-Muslim riots occurred in the 1850s and were fueled by British policies that aimed to pit the two groups against each other. The situation escalated further in the 20th century, culminating in the partition of India in 1947, which left a lasting impact on the relationship between Muslims and Hindus. Reflecting on current affairs and moving forward. In light of this historical context, It is clear that the current animosity and tension between the two communities is not a product of ancient religious conflict, but a modern invention, largely driven by colonial policies. The partition of India, while a painful chapter, did not define the entirety of Hindu-Muslim relations in the subcontinent. For over 1,000 years, Muslims and Hindus lived side by side, contributing to the cultural, political, and social fabric of the land. While differences between the two communities certainly exist, it is essential to acknowledge the contributions of Muslims to India's development and to recognize that the narrative of a divided India is a product of colonial legacy, not an intrinsic reality. We must move beyond this narrative and work towards creating an environment where both Muslims and Hindus can coexist peacefully once again. We must also be cautious of the rhetoric we use online and in public spaces. In times of tension, it is easy to fall into the trap of inflammatory rhetoric, but we must remember that such words only serve to deepen divides. Prayers for peace and unity. Finally, I pray for the peace and stability of the lands and peoples who are affected by these tensions. May Allah protect all individuals regardless of their faith, and grant us the wisdom to navigate these challenges with discernment and understanding. We must strive for a future where we can acknowledge our differences, but also appreciate the shared history that unites us. This is the path to healing and reconciliation. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to stay updated with more inspiring Islamic content. Like, share, and comment to support our work and spread the message.